Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Joseph Kim, and I'm going to be teaching you how to program in Python. So this video series is actually meant for my cousin Matt, who's a junior in high school. So it's going to be pretty elementary, and it's going to assume that you don't know anything about programming at all. So if it's going a little too slow for you, I apologize, but it's going to be very thorough. And again, this is kind of this is a programming tutorial, but it's not really just for Python, it's for pretty much any computer language. Once you get better at programming, you'll quickly realize that, the differences between languages is actually quite small. It's more of a personal thing, but the overall programming concepts are going to hold for whatever language you're programming in, whichever operating system. Yeah. So I've got this tablet that I just got that's supposed to, oops. It should theoretically let me write on this white screen. Let's see if it's working. Yeah, so it'll let me write on this, oh my god, on this white screen. I do apologize in advance for my terrible handwriting. You'll just have to deal with it. It's also harder on the screen. Alright, great. So we're going to be, I'm going to be doing a lot of scribbling, kind of doing some general outlines on this whiteboard, I guess, and we'll be obviously spending a lot of time in the actual text editor and writing actual Python code. So before we get started, and by the way, I put in Python in parentheses because this is going to cover a lot of general programming ideas, not just Python specific things. Before we get started, though, let's kind of talk about, what is a program? I think that's somewhere that's very good to start out, right? If you want to learn how to program, you probably should know what a program is first. So what is a program? Oh, and by the way, before we, get into this, I should say that there is a book on Python that I highly recommend. It's by John Zell, who is a professor at CMU, and I really highly recommend this book. It's great in that it's not Python specific. It covers a lot of general programming concepts, and it's a fantastic book. Definitely read it. It's a great read. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's get started here. So what is a program? And if I were to go ahead and define this, I would say that it's something that follows logic to achieve a purpose. That is, achieve. And so something that follows logic to achieve a purpose. I think this is very important, and I think the most important word here is logic. And computers, they don't have emotions. I know people get upset and they hit their computers and they think their computer's being mean to them and stuff. But to be honest, computers don't have emotion. They simply follow logic. And I think that's very, very important. And when you're learning to program, the most important thing about programming will be logic, right? This will be so important just because, what you're learning to do when you're programming is how to control the logic. How do you control the kind of the thought process that your computer goes through to do whatever you're trying to do? And again, that comes back over here to achieve a certain purpose, right? So I think these are kind of the key points that you should start out with, just as the background to when you approach programming. When you're writing a program, all you're doing is kind of specifying the logic, right? And you're going to try and achieve a purpose. That's really it, Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to talk a little bit about what goes on kind of at the computer level, the hardware level, when you're writing code. And so we're not going to spend too much time on this. There's tons of great books on the actual logic and kind of different things going on, lower level stuff. But we just want to talk a little bit about it just so you kind of know what's going on inside your computer when you're actually programming. So Python is, what's this? Yeah. So Python is something that you call a high-level programming language. So once I write that down, it is a high-level. My handwriting, I swear, is not quite this bad in person. Programming language, right? And so this includes Python. This includes other languages like Java, .NET, C#, and obviously Python. And so what it means for programming language to be high level is that a lot of the lower level functionality, low level code is kind of abstracted and kind of hidden away from the programmer. So, as a Python programmer, you don't really have to worry too much about low level code. You don't have to worry about the actual kind of things going on really behind the scenes. A lot of it's kind of hidden from you, but you can still access all that power and all that functionality. And so when you write a program in high level code, you're going to have your code here, and when you want to actually run your program, you're going to have to do some. You're going to have to use a compiler. And so what a compiler does is it converts your code into a lower level version, I would say, and that is in assembly. Right, and so do keep in mind that Python is a little bit different in that you don't really need to use a compiler. It actually uses something called a virtual machine or an interpreter. But don't worry too much about that right now. That all it means is that there's an extra step kind of in this process. And then the assembly code is converted by a computer into the actual binary or machine code that runs at the very low level, and you should pretty much never have to see binary code. At least I would hope so. So let's just write binary code. And so this is kind of the process and kind of what's happening under the hood as you're programming in Python or another high-level programming language. Fortunately, we're only really going to have to deal with this level, and then sometimes we'll have to deal with the compiler or the interpreter a little bit, but not too much. So I'm going to clear this. The next thing I want to kind of talk about is kind of give you a roadmap and kind of give you a better idea to kind of like represent programming and kind of just visualize it in your head. I think it's very important to have a good idea of what programming is and is not. So I think the best way to split up a program really is into two things, right? So I think the most important part of the program, and I've talked about this already before, is the logic. And this is extremely important, and this is really kind of the backbone for your program. And the second thing that you're gonna want is functions, right? Or you can call it functionality, but I'll just write functions, right? And so what functions are kind of things that actually do stuff for you, right? So your logic is gonna call different functions that actually do things, right? But the important thing is not necessarily what the functions are, but more how the logic behind them works, right? So let me just kind of give you an idea, kind of what I mean, kind of this way of abstracting what a program is, kind of visualizing it. So first, I think we should start out with a definition of what a function is. And so a function is something that has, and it's very similar to a mathematical definition of a function, but it's something that takes an input or inputs and has an output. So this is and they can potentially have more than one output, but this is kind of a general definition of what a function is, and kind of it's very similar to the mathematical definition, but we'll see some key differences. And another way to kind of think about this is that it actually does something. And then the second part that I want to talk about, like I said, this is actually the more important part, and a part that we'll be focusing a lot on, the logic, right? And so one way to kind of think about what logic is in terms of the context of a programming language is it's the thing that controls the execution of different functions. And so if this is a little bit confusing of a definition, you can also replace functions with functionality, right? And so what this means is that, your functions actually do something, right? They might print something to a screen. They might actually process a data file. but how are you going to control how that function occurs, when it occurs, and kind of in the context of interacting functions, right? And the way you're going to do that is using logic, right? And this logic is going to include stuff like booleans, if statements, else statements, kind of controlling the flow or the execution of the different functions or functionality. So at this point, we're going to just kind of dive a little bit deeper into the logic function kind of model of programming, and we're going to do that with an example. And so I think this is really important to get, because this is going to be a very, very important way to kind of just visualize and kind of think in your head exactly how programming works. So let's just make sure you write this down. Example of logic function. Let's call it a model. Just kind of a way of thinking about programs, right? So I think something that's really important is, what do I mean by function, right? Because this is kind of a vague term right now, and I've just been kind of saying it's a way to do something, right? So let me just give you one really easy example, and I think the traditional kind of example that people use as their first program is the Hello World program, right? So let's think about it like this. For a Hello World program, what exactly do we need to write a program that simply outputs Hello World, right? So I guess the first thing we can ask is, do we need any inputs, right? Do we need to actually collect any sort of input from the user? And the answer to that is no, right? We're just going to be printing the words Hello World. So we don't need any actual input from the user. We don't need any mouse clicks. We don't need anything from the user, right? But the next question that you should ask yourself is, I guess the logic should really come first, right? So what type of logical code do we need? What does our code need to do? Is it going to be doing any sort of guessing of any sort, any sort of decision making of that? And for this program, there's not much logic. It's just going to be a simple execution, right? And so the next question after, sorry about that. It's not a question mark. So the next step after simple execution is, what are you going to be executing? And that's really the question of functions, right? Oh man, I'm going to get used to this eventually. And so the question is, what functions do we need for this program? And there's actually only one function we'll need to write this program, and that is some kind of function that'll output data to somewhere, right? And that somewhere could be something like a GUI or some kind of window, right? And so for the very basic programs we'll be writing initially, we're going to be using the console, or the terminal application, whatever you want to call it. So we need some kind of function that'll do console output, right? And so the question is, where do we get this function from? And I think that's a really important point. And I'll be saying this time and time again, but the whole point is, it's not right. Don't reinvent the wheel. So I will be saying this time and time again, and I think this is a very important concept to understand as a programmer. Don't reinvent the wheel. And so what I mean by that is basically these functions that we need, they can be really basic or somewhat more complex, but someone's already gone out there and written the necessary functionality, right? Someone's written a function that will output to the console, right? So what that means is we don't have to actually go and write a new function that does that. That function already exists, right? And so that means we can just use that function that's already been written. And so this is kind of going to bring us to the idea of libraries. And one way to think about a library is, functionality, right? So libraries are where these functions kind of exist, right? And so there's something called the Python standard library, or these are kind of the standard functions that exist within Python. And one of those functions is the console output function, which is just known as a print function, right? And like I was saying before, every function has an input and output, right? So the input for this function is going to be the text that we want to print to the console, right? And so the output of this function isn't necessarily going to be anything really, but what it's going to do is it's actually going to do something, right? And what that something is output to the console. For example, if the function that we were looking at was, add, then we might have two numbers that we pass to it. And in this case, it would actually have an output, a return function, and that would actually just be, the sum of these two. In terms of the print function, we don't really need to return anything, but it actually does something, and that something is to print to the console. Right, so this model of logic function kind of model of programming is actually going to be very, very important, and you're gonna see tons of examples of it later as we write more complicated programs. But let me just clear this real quick. The first thing, so we're gonna write our first program. It's gonna be this Hello World program. But the first thing you need before you can write anything in Python is you have to actually download Python, right? So you're going to download Python and install it. If you're on a Mac, it's already installed for you. When you download it, make sure you download 2.7, not version 3.0, because we're going to be writing in 2.7. It's kind of the standard right now. Second, what you need is some kind of text editor. I'm going to be using Wing IDE, which I believe is free for students. I got mine for free. I think you just have to send them an email. But we're going to be using Wing IDE. You can also use Idle, which is the free one. I haven't heard too many great things about it, but you're free to use it. Anyhow, both of these should be free if you're a student. This is definitely free. It comes with Python. All right, so I'm going to assume you've downloaded Python and installed it. So you can either boot up Idle or Wing IDE. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So here it is, right? And so this is where we're going to be running our actual running and writing our actual Python code. So right here you can see I've just made a file called test.py. You could just get file new, and you can see it's making new files right here. Don't save. I'll just close those. So I'm going to be writing in test. So let's talk about our that logic function model. Again, there's really no logic really involved here. The only logic is just simple line-by-line execution. We don't need any program logic or flow control. But the function, like I said, is a print function, and that is a standard Python function. So you can just go ahead and use it. It's just print. And you can see here that it's recognized the function. You can see the F that stands for function. So there it is, print, right? Now, you can see the help here, and it kind of tells you the definition of the function. So this is a great way to learn how to code. So you can see that this simply prints whatever value that we input into it out to the console, right? And so most functions, you'll be passing the arguments within parentheses. The thing is that with the print function, you actually don't need to do that. Just because it's so standardized, you can go ahead and just simply write whatever you want to print out here. In Python 3, you actually have to pass it within parentheses, but we're coding Python 2, so you don't have to do that. So let's go ahead and write what we want to say, which is hello world. And so something that is very important in Python is that if you're ever entering text, you got to put them in quotes. You can use single or double quotes. I'm going to use double here, and let's just say hello world. Very simple program, one-line program. Obviously very simple logic, and we're using a pre-written function, the print function. So to go ahead and run this program, all you got to do is go to debug and hit start continue, and the shortcut for that is also F5. So if I go ahead and hit that, it's going to ask me for my settings, debug settings. I can just leave them at default. It wants me to save the Python file before I run it, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And there you go. Inside the debug in out, it's going to list the actual output. So this is our console. And if you see right here, you can see our function was called and it outputs hello world. So I mean, this is a this is obviously a very simple function, but I think it's really important to kind of just introduce you to that model we're talking about. So this pretty much concludes our first video. Obviously, a very basic introduction to the idea of programming, what it means, what exactly is the framework for programming. And so on the next lesson, we're going to continue with more advanced material.